Welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I am your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and this is the question and answer segment for the show. I haven't been able to answer questions over the past couple weeks, so we have a bit of a backlog for questions. So I'll be answering questions on our first and our second live stream. And so the first question we have here is on the decline of the United States. And can the decline of the United States be attributed to any specific events or actions? I'd probably say really related to the reserve currency and global trade currency status. That's probably the tipping point. Whether you want to look at the situation that was created in regards to the Federal Reserve Bank in the early 1900s, or immediately after World War II, when the United States dollar was chosen as the global reserve currency, because most of the other currencies in the world were in ruin after the devastation of World War II. Or maybe you could say it's like the Nixon era, when we completely decoupled the dollar from the gold standard. Those were all really significant events related to our global reserve currency status. And the thing is, sure, you can print paper money that is essentially completely worthless, and people will go along with it just based off of inertia for a little while. It's like we've always been doing it this way, or we've been doing it this way throughout all of living memory, so let's continue to do it this way. But eventually people are going to catch on that your currency is not valuable. I would say that after Nixon decoupled from the gold reserve, we did have a couple things kind of backing our currency. One was the petrodollar. So Saudi Arabia and other oil producing countries were like, yeah, we will only sell our oil for the US dollar. And that worked for the longest time. Well, guess what? Saudi Arabia and other countries are now trading oil for other currencies. And that, in the short term, it may not have that big of an impact. It's like changing things a little bit in terms of global reserve and trade status. But in the long term, that's going to have a huge impact, because this is one of the pillars backing up the US dollar still. And it's losing one of those pillars. The other pillar, I would say, of the US dollar is the US military. The threat of US military consequences is a major reason that people use the US dollar. Fomentation of color revolutions, direct military action. America invades a ton of countries all the time. I mean, I think it was something like 17 years out of America's entire history, or the only years that America hasn't been at war or invading someone. America is a very hostile military power throughout the world. And so the United States dollar is backed by military force, which is interesting because it's kind of a cyclical process where the US dollar is backed by military force, but the military is only so powerful because of the fact that the United States can just print money, and they're essentially creating value. Because other countries, whenever they print money and want to make it worth something, they have to actually back it by goods and services. They have to make sure that it's what they're doing is of value to the world, so that they can trade their currency for other currencies, or they can sell goods in order to get US dollars to trade. But United States has this unique situation where, because it's the global reserve and trade currency, they're able to just print money, and it's of value. They can just trade it for things like people's labor, which is a very interesting situation. But it can lead to the United States becoming very lazy, and that's why America has lost its manufacturing capacity, because it just prints money and it's of value on its own. But going back to the military situation, the military backs the U.S. dollar, and the reason the military is so strong, which is a debatable topic, is because the United States has so many dollars that it can print to build very fancy equipment. That fancy equipment, though, it hasn't been winning wars. It didn't win the Vietnam War. It didn't really win the Korean War. I mean, Korea is still a split country into North and South Korea. Vietnam, not only did the United States side lose in Vietnam, but Vietnam is extremely successful now under its communist government. And then you have places like Afghanistan, which the United States lost after a 20-year war. They ran out of there and left a ton of equipment, millions of dollars worth of equipment. And so Yes, United States has some very fancy equipment, and they're spread out across hundreds of bases all across the world and the majority of countries in the world. But they're not really winning wars with that equipment. Another, just because this question is about can the decline of the United States be attributed to any specific events or actions? Something else I would say on that front is the United States really focused on the Middle East and the supposed war on terror after 9/11, and they really took their eye off the ball. Like they thought Russia, they hated Russia, but they thought Russia wasn't a threat anymore. They called it the gas station of the world, right? It just wasn't a threat, but they hated Russia, and so they thought that after they decoupled from the Middle East, they can just go back to beating up on Russia. And Russia was a lot stronger, it had a lot more manufacturing capacity than they initially realized. And so right now in Ukraine, the United States and the entire Western world is sending all of its reserves of military equipment to Ukraine, and it's just getting blown up by Russia. And so you have this interesting situation where the United States really is declining because they focus so much on winning Middle Eastern wars that they weren't ready for like a typical war with another great power. And they didn't even realize these other great powers existed. Like the rise of China happened while the United States wasn't paying attention. They were focused on the Middle East. And that might sound shocking, but that seems to be the case from what I see here.